Hello folks, I'm Alex, this is Alex Unabridged, and this is my wrap up for a couple of science fiction stories I read in July. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, time for my science fiction for the somewhat hesitant reading project wrap up for July. And that is Planet of the Apes and also the short story by Philip K. Dick, We Can Remember It For You, Wholesale. Okay, so let's go straight into these two then. These are part of the phase of the project, which is, of course, great books, great movies. And so I have a bit to say about the movies for these two as well, for these two stories, movies that were based on these stories. So let's start off then with Planet of the Apes by Pierre Boulle. The book of this follows a journalist called Ulysses Meru, who is part of a scientific expedition to the star Betelgeuse. The spaceship that he's on crashes on a seemingly idyllic planet inhabited by primitive humans and highly civilized apes. The apes, there are gorillas, chimpanzees and orangutans. They've established a society where they kind of hold dominion over the subservient human population. Meru's captured and treated quite brutally as a dumb animal, basically. However, he manages to learn to communicate with the apes and demonstrates his intelligence, particularly to a sympathetic chimpanzee, Zira, and her fiancé, Cornelius, and they are psychologists. They study human psychology. And so with Zira and Cornelius's help, Meru plots an escape with a young human woman, Nova, who has borne Meru's child. So that's the basic premise of it, the basic plot of it. So what did I think? Yeah, I didn't like this one, unfortunately. This was just not my kind of thing at all. I had this on audiobook. The narration was decent, but it's just not my kind of thing. In all honesty, it dragged quite a fair bit for me. It felt quite repetitive. I got bored with it quite quickly. There was a lot of sections where I was just like, oh, come on. And the biggest thing for me that kind of stopped me from liking it, I think, was the character of Meru. He came off as really pompous, self-important arse, basically, smug, superior. I don't know whether this kind of character, this character presentation, my reading of it, etc., was intentional. But either way, he annoyed the hell out of me. I really just I couldn't connect with him at all. I couldn't really root for him. So that was quite a big kind of blocker to me kind of getting into it, I think. The world building is decent in it, but it's just not my thing. Again, I just didn't connect with the world. I wasn't particularly captured by it. Some of the ideas were interesting. That's where kind of, I think, sort of for me, there was some positive stuff. It is a social satire, sort of social commentary, and some of that stuff was interesting, I think, well done. The science in it, was rather wonky, particularly the ideas around kind of convergent evolution, but mainly around things like ancestral memory or genetic memory, whichever you want to kind of call it. That stuff was just all a little bit like, oh, come on now. But the social satire of it, I think that's the point of it, really. That's the the kind of the main focal point. And those ideas, as I say, were interesting, if not a little dated in their presentation. Speaking of dated stuff, it does feel very, very dated, especially when it comes to attitudes towards women. I'm used to kind of encountering this in older books. I mean, this is what, 1960 something, 63 perhaps. So I'm kind of always aware that I might come across that kind of thing, and I wasn't surprised to see it. But this one is quite bad. To be honest, I think my lack of enjoyment on this one really comes down to the fact that it's largely just not for me. I just didn't connect with it. Didn't connect with the world, the characters, the story, or anything really. Objectively speaking, it is not a bad book by any means, but it's really just not my thing. I think that's all I can say about it. Really, it's just absolutely not my bag. So I will pop the rating up on screen that I've come up with. Character I've given a 5 to. This isn't just because I didn't personally like the character of Meru and the other characters, but they all just seemed quite thin, really. They were quite superficial, quite thin. The atmosphere and setting I've given a 5 to. Again, it was an interesting enough kind of setting, but it just didn't it didn't capture me. I couldn't picture it necessarily really well, things like that. And yeah, it just kind of did nothing for me. The writing I've given a 6 to. It's decent writing. It has got some humour in there. It has got some, kind of good turns of phrase. Boulle could write for sure. But it was decent. It was decent. That's what I can say about it. Plot I've given a 5 to. For me, it was just way too repetitive, and the pacing was just slow for me. It as I say, it lost me quite a bit. I found it quite dull. Ideas wise, I've given it a 7. Yeah, I think the ideas in it are good. As I say, the social stuff, the social commentary, satire, the soft science, if you like, that was interesting. My enjoyment, though, of it, I've given a 3. It was a little bit like, well, I'm going to get through this because it's short and it's on the list, and I really didn't want to DNF it. It wasn't that bad. But it was just very, okay, well, I've read that now. So if I add all those scores up and divide by 6, I get a 5.17 out of 10. So that gets rounded down to a 5 out of 10 and a 2.5 stars on Storygraph. So, as I say, not the worst book I've ever read by far. It's certainly not a bad book. It's just really not for me. So then, a quick note about the film. I did watch the film. I hadn't seen the film since I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and back then I hated the film. It freaked me the hell out. I did not like the makeup of the apes at all, and I was freaked out by the score as well. I will say now that having rewatched it and expecting to not like it, it's better than I thought. It's better than the book for sure in my eyes. The plot changes that are made in it make a lot more sense than the plot in the book, to be honest. They solved a lot of the pacing issues that I had with the book. It was a lot more engaging, the film was. More action, stuff like that in it. And I much preferred the ending to the film as well. I still didn't like the main character, which in this case is Taylor, played by Charlton Heston. But he wasn't quite so much of an arse as Meru was in the book. I still hated the score though. Not because it freaked me out, I just find it really grating. But I did quite like some of the elements of the production design generally. Although I still find the makeup a little bit freaky, but that might just be that might just be the connection to childhood memories that's doing that. But it doesn't scare me like it did when I was a kid. But yeah, some of the production design, some of the kind of cinematography in it, things like that, I did quite enjoy. It's never going to be my thing, to be honest. I just don't connect with the story in general, but I definitely enjoyed the film more than the book. And it was, I kind of came away kind of going, oh, okay, that was decent enough. That was a decent enough couple of hours basically spent watching it. I have, just as a note, seen a couple of the modern films, the most recent films of Planet of the Apes, and again, just doesn't really do anything for me. So I think it's just Planet of the Apes is just not for me, and move on. Okay then, on to the second one, and that is We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. Just one, just the short story out of this big chunking collection of short stories. But this short story is or was the basis for Total Recall, which is one of my favourite films ever. It's definitely my favourite science fiction film, but it is one of my favourite films. Certainly one of my favourite action trashy films. I love it. I just love it. So this follows Douglas Quayle, a bored office worker who becomes obsessed with going to Mars, but he can't afford a trip to Mars, so he turns to Recall Incorporated, a company that implants false memories of realistic experiences. Quayle opts for the Secret Agent on Mars package and begins the process of having the memories implanted, but it triggers buried memories of a real trip to Mars where he worked as a government assassin. And it seems his previous real memories were the implants, and it goes from there. So what did I think to this one then? This was a really interesting reading experience for me, given with it, being the inspiration for one of my favourite films. It starts off just like the movie, but it does take quite a different path quite quickly. Once it's past that opening, the ending's very different as well, and it has a really nice twist in it. I've read a few of Philip K. Dick's novels, but I've never read any short stories before now. But this one had all the trademarks of Philip K. Dick's writing. That's the humour, the off the wall ideas, the philosophy that I love about his writing, all that kind of stuff. And that's what I kind of always appreciate about Philip K. Dick stuff when I read it. It's how he makes me think, how he makes me question, how it makes me puzzle over things. The philosophy found in this is surprisingly nuanced for its length. I mean, it's essentially a sort of short story novelette type length. There are far more levels to Quayle's psyche than you'd find in the film. It's more complex in that respect, for sure. It's also quite impressive how well-rounded, how fleshed out the character of Douglas Quayle is in this, for its length. It's constructed really well. It sets up its twists really effectively. It's masterfully written. It was really easy to get into, left me with plenty to think about and puzzle over. I really liked this. I do like Philip K. Dick, I knew that already, but it has been a while since I read anything of his. I think September last year I read something. But now it's got me wanting to go back in and dive back into some more mind meltiness from PKD. I really enjoyed this. This was a really excellent experience. I thought I would enjoy it based on my my love for the film. But yeah, it was a really, really interesting one. Okay, rating for this one then. I'll pop the rating up on the screen. I've used the same rating sort of criteria that I've used for other fiction, but I've also taken into account that this is a short story, so the form is different and there's slightly different things to consider, but I've tweaked that in my own head when I've come to rating this. So character, I've given an 8 to. As I say, I think the character of Quayle is very well fleshed out for this. The atmosphere and setting, I've given an 8 to. Yeah, I really enjoyed this, and what was interesting was that the visual elements of this, this for me, what the visuals that it conjured weren't just a transposition of the visuals that I know from the film. They were original, they were different, and that's the strength of Philip K. Dick's writing in that respect, is that it evoked something different from what I know of the film kind of version, if you like. Writing, I've given a 9 to. I really like Philip K. Dick's style. I like his prose style. I find it humorous. I find it quite straightforward. Even if his ideas are the bonkers bit that I find sometimes it's hard to get my head around, but I don't ever find his language use difficult. I think he's a very accessible writer, and I just really enjoy his stuff. Plot, I've given it an 8 to. Yep, really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed seeing the differences between the plot in the the short story and the plot of the film. Yeah, I really enjoyed the twists in it. It was a real good, kind of fast-paced, interesting, thinky plot. if that's a description. Okay, ideas-wise, I've given it a 9. Yep, loved the ideas in this. And just, as I say, the mind meltiness, the questions that Dick asks, some of the bonkers ideas. Really enjoyed the philosophy in this. Quite a bit of nuance, as I say, but I kind of expect that from Philip K. Dick. And I wasn't disappointed on this. And my enjoyment of this, I'm going to give a 9. I really enjoyed the experience of finally reading the source material for one of my favourite films, but just the story on its own merits was just a really enjoyable lunchtime read, quick read. And the enjoyment largely comes from the fact that it was a quick read. It is short, but there's so much in it. It packs a punch for sure. And I love stuff that does that. And so, yeah, really thoroughly enjoyed it. So if I add all of those scores up and divide by 6, we get an 8.5 out of 10 for We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. I haven't given this a star rating because it won't go on Storygraph in isolation. I'll wait until I've read the rest of the book and then rate the book as a whole, the collection of short stories. Okay, so yes, so the film, Total Recall, I'm just gonna I'm not gonna say much about it really because I can go on forever with it. I've already said how much I absolutely love it. I have rewatched it again. I'll have any excuse, any excuse at all to watch it. But yeah, it does go, off quite far away from the short story quite quickly. All of the action stuff, all of the, Arnie going to Mars and having to uncover this conspiracy and all that kind of good stuff, and the romance and all that kind of stuff, not in the short story at all. But I love it in the film, and there are just, as I say, there are elements of that film that are just some of my favourite scenes, like the scenes at the the spaceport in Mars with the 2 weeks lady, things like that. I love the production design of it. I love the sort of late 80s early 90s kind of aesthetic to it. It's just an utter joy to watch every time. So I can't really be objective about Total Recall. I'll say that now because it's just one of those which I absolutely adore, and nothing is ever going to change that. We won't mention the 2012 version with Colin Farrell. I will leave that there. So yes, so there we go. That is my wrap up for what I read for my Science Fiction for the Somewhat Hesitant reading project for July. So August then, that we are now just in, I will be reading The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, and also Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. The last 2 books in the Great Books, Great Movies phase of this project. Who Goes There obviously being the inspiration for The Thing. So I'm really looking forward to getting to both of those, actually. This should be really good fun. So I will leave it there for today, folks. Thank you very much for watching. As always, do drop your thoughts in the comments below. It's always lovely to hear from you. I will be back on Sunday with my weekly vlog, so I do hope you will join me for that then. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.